Welcome everyone to the 2015-2016 Advanced Placement United States History class at Floral Park Memorial. This is year 2 for Mr. Simone's videos that will be posted to the YouTube channel, but this is also year 2 for the redesigned APUSH History course. And let's all hope that the changes that were made for year 2 are better and help us to approach what I promise will be a very exciting year. And please always keep in mind this quote in the bottom from the most impressive mind in education today, Sir Ken Robinson. Let's not emphasize testing, let's emphasize learning as much as we can. But I have to say to you all that last year was quite a controversial year for AP US History. You might think that that's an odd statement to be making, but there were a few school boards throughout our country that refused to allow their teachers to incorporate the new curriculum. So even though you would think that American history should be very simple and straightforward, as you can see here from the picture, there was tremendous controversy. Students actually staged a walkout in Jefferson County, Colorado. When I went to grade the AP exams last June, a teacher from Jefferson County got up in front of the room and started to cry her tears of joy for all the support that she received throughout the year. Now you might say, well, what is all this controversy about? Well, basically, some people felt as if that the newly redesigned course was emphasizing too much about the negative aspects of American history and not enough of American exceptionalism. I am here to tell you that I will teach this course like I have always taught this course. I will teach you facts, I will teach you details, but I will ask you to form opinions on whether or not the United States made the right decision or the wrong decision. I will never lead you one way or the other. So I don't think we will have any problem with these controversies. If you look at this slide, the course is divided up into 9 different time periods, and there is a specific reason for the end of each time period. There is also a percentage next to it. That is what the College Board tells us. Each class will, each time period will consist of that percent on the exam. So I'll take the number of days that we have together in the class and make sure that I use that to determine how many days we'll spend on each time period. So for today, what I would like to do is go over each time period because it's very helpful if you have a good understanding of what took place during American history. And this would really be from your 7th and 8th grade knowledge. So we will start with time period 1. And that is from 1491 until 1607. There is a one-sentence explanation under each of these. And for this one, it says, on a North American continent, controlled by American Indians, contact among the peoples of Europe, the Americas, and West Africa created a new world. Now, last year I told the class that the course will begin in 1491. And then students opened up the test booklet, and one of the questions says, prior to 1491. So, of course, as most students do, after the 48-hour window had been completed, they yelled at me and said I did a terrible job, because I told them it would begin in 1491. Well, I was not the only teacher under that impression. Please be aware that most teachers were expecting the course to begin in 1491. We now know that by 1491, the College Board means every year before 1491. Go try to figure that one out. But we all know that 1492 is the year for Christopher Columbus. We probably remember that song in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I think I probably even just got that wrong because I don't know that song. But there is a big debate over Columbus's legacy. There are some people that celebrate this as a very patriotic event for Americans, whereas others believe that he does not deserve credit for the exploration. And we will explore this later on. In 1565, please know that that's the beginning of what we consider the first European settlement of a town in North America. It was St. Augustine, Florida. Many people, many Americans think that the beginning was either, they think, Jamestown or Plymouth. That is a more England-centric view of American history. So the actual first one was by the Spanish, St. Augustine, Florida. And then you may know the story in 1587 of Roanoke, which was the lost colony. The settlers of this area, I think they actually arrived in 1584, were left on their own as the leaders went back to fight the Spanish Armada in England. When they came back in 1590, all of the original settlers were gone. So historians still debate what actually happened to these early settlers. Were they victims of cannibalism? Did they all die? Did they incorporate themselves into a Native American tribe? Historians have a big mystery on their hands. This time period, which as you can see is mostly the 1500s, is really going to be the development of European settlements as Native Americans who are already here are being faced with confrontations and conflict. So that's really what time period 1 is all about. All right, now we get to time period 2. That is 1607 to 1754. You probably would know this time period as the 13 colonies. But I always want students to understand the 13 colonies don't magically appear. We don't arrive on the continent and say, hey, let's make 13 colonies. The first British colony in 1607 that lasted was Jamestown. The last British colony was not until 1733, and that's Georgia. In the course of this 125-year period, you will see different colonies from the British. Remember, the French were here, the Spanish were here, the Dutch were here. But by 1733, you will have the formation of what you probably know as the first 13 British colonies. So we will learn this in the context of Jamestown being the first permanent English settlement, then Plymouth, then Massachusetts Bay. Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay will eventually become the Massachusetts colony. So there's a lot of conflict, a lot of colonial culture that develops during this time period, and you might know about the Salem witch trials. And I will definitely make reference to this quote from John Winthrop. He was a very strict leader of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and I would like you to be familiar with this quote, "City upon a hill." I'm a little out of practice, so I think I may just have picked the highlighting button. But "City upon a hill," he wanted the world to view Massachusetts Bay as the greatest settlement that existed. Many future presidents have referred to America as being a city upon a hill. All right, so now we get to time period 3, and why did this end in 1754? That is because we have a war. That is the French and Indian War. It's 1754 to 1763. That is when the French and the Indians fought against the English and the colonists. It's also called the 7 Years' War because this French and Indian conflict in North America was also a conflict in Europe, for those of you who took AP European history. It just started in 1756 there. That's why it's referred to as the 7 Years' War. This is a major turning point for American history because the Americans, the colonists, and the British were on the same side. When the war's over, the Parliament expects the colonists to help pay for the war, and the colonists, many of them, do not want to do so. So this is why it's a turning point, because now you're going to lead into causes of the American Revolution. So this whole 1763 to 1776 time is when Americans are trying to galvanize support for the revolutionary effort. The final event will probably be the publication of Common Sense by Thomas Paine, but I need to stop talking because I'm being too specific. This is just an overview. In 1776 is when the Declaration of Independence is written. Our first form of government is the Articles of Confederation. Most of the power resided with the states. That will not work, so then we have the Constitutional Convention, which will lead to the Constitution that we have today. Our first president is George Washington, and our second president is John Adams. However, the man I'd like to emphasize briefly is our first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, and you might wonder, why is he on the cover of a playbill? That is because the hottest play on Broadway right now is a play about Alexander Hamilton's life. I did see it. It was spectacular. The best play I've ever seen. And there is a good chance we will try to organize a field trip for those people who are actually interested. His life is quite remarkable, and I look forward to teaching it to you. Now we go to time period 4, and that is 1800 to 1848. And if you're wondering who these men are, this is Andrew Jackson on the left. I've got to figure out how to get this pen. I think I just figured it out. This is Andrew Jackson, but I don't want the pen to be so thick. And this is one of the most underrated men in American history. Do any of you know who it is? I'll give you a second to just yell it out. That is correct. Good job. It is Henry Clay. Henry Clay, who you will learn an awful lot about during this time period. So what's happening here? As you can see from the description up top, the new republic is struggling to define and extend democratic ideals. So we're trying to build up more voting privileges for people. We're also developing our economy. And I think the big change, the United States is expanding. Territorial expansion, which you know from the phrase manifest destiny, or you may, really, expansion begins with Thomas Jefferson when he buys Louisiana and will not end, but pretty much will get most of our land by the Mexican-American War. After that war, we are victorious and we acquire what you know of as California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. In between this time period, there's going to be the War of 1812. There's going to be an election I'm going to spend a great deal amount of time on in 1824, corrupt bargain. And historians really call a lot of this time the age of Jackson. He is one of the most prominent figures, political figures of the era. And I always like to emphasize James K. Polk as one of the most underrated presidents. But this is your 1800-1848 time period. Okay, now we go to time period 5, and it is 1844 to 1877, with the primary event of the Civil War dominating this era. So I wrote here, as the nation expanded and its population grew, regional tensions, especially over slavery, led to a civil war, the course and aftermath of which transformed American society. So now, when the Mexican-American War is over, the United States has all this land, and the big debate is, what do we do with it? Should this territory allow slavery? Should it not allow slavery? Should we let the people decide? These are the debates that are taking place. So that war, some people view as another turning point because the debates intensify. So throughout the 1850s, there are events that take place that are only further creating tensions between the North and the South. The Compromise 1850 will be one of them. Kansas-Nebraska Act. Some of you might remember Bleeding Kansas, when pro- and anti-slavery people were killing each other. You might remember the Dred Scott decision, in which the Supreme Court said that slaves were property. And then really, once Lincoln is elected in 1860, that will begin the state-by-state secession down south, South Carolina being the first state to secede. I would like you to know the dates of the Civil War. I think it helps to put everything else in context, and that will be 1861 to 1865. Once the war is over, actually this past weekend, by the way, I did get a chance to go to the Confederate Museum in Richmond, Virginia. I'm not sure if any of you have been there. But I did learn a great deal about Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, because basically this was the house that he lived in during the Civil War. And definitely can share some more stories with you. But once the Civil War is over, the time period in America is called Reconstruction. And this is when the southern states need to be readmitted into the country. And we also have to deal with how we're going to treat these newly freed African Americans as the 13th Amendment officially abolishes slavery. All right, so now we go to time period. I believe we're up to 6. And this goes from 1865 to 1898. You might see some overlap with years. There's a reason for that. And even in my little descriptions, I don't always stay exactly with the years. You know this by the term industrialization. You know the late 1800s as when America is going to become an industrialized, urbanized power. We are going to develop all different sorts of industry. You probably remember the Rockefellers and Andrew Carnegies of this time. What you might not have remembered is the impact of the Homestead Act on this time period. And that is when the government offered people 160 acres of free land, as long as they agreed to live on it for 5 years. The goal was to encourage people to move out west, to get the country expanding. And in order to get people out there, we're going to work on building a transcontinental railroad, the first one of which was completed in 1869. And that took place in Promontory Point, Utah. They put a golden spike in the ground. They connected the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific together. By 1900, we had completed 4 transcontinental railroads. And there will be a time where my sarcasm will seep in, and I will say to you, can you believe that we were able to build a transcontinental railroad, 4 of them by 1900, but we can't build anything in our country today? But I'll save that for later. You know about the whole era of inventions. Alexander Graham Bell received a patent for the phone in 1876. There's also going to be a lot of conflict with Native Americans again during this time. You're going to see the rise of unions as more owners are taking advantage of workers. And at some point, I will mention to you about this man, William Jennings Bryan, who lost the presidency 3 times, but had a major speech in which he was trying to get us off of just the gold standard and wanted gold and silver. But what I really want to emphasize here is that Mark Twain referred to this time period as, let's see if this pen works. Yes, he referred to it as the Gilded Age. And the reason why he referred to it as the Gilded Age is because he argued that on the surface, the country looked great, gilded, in gold. But beneath the surface, there were tremendous problems and abject poverty. So his argument, as many critics of the Gilded Age, point to the fact that the gap between the rich and the poor was widening. And there are some people who think we're living through a second Gilded Age today, that the gap between the rich and the poor just continues to widen. So keep that in mind when we go over that time period. All right, our next time period, 1890 to 1945, this has the highest percentage on the test, but this is a tough one. There's a lot of major events that are taking place here. To summarize, we start with the age of imperialism. So now, because of the rise of big business, please make this connection, you're going to see a greater move for us to acquire new land overseas. Businessmen are encouraging or influencing politicians for us to get more land so that they can acquire raw materials and that they also can sell more goods. So this first era of imperialism takes place during this time. In addition, in America, back home, you are going to see a progressive era. You're going to see people who are trying to solve those problems of the Gilded Age. And by the way, in addition to the economic problems, there will be a call for women's rights. And there'll be a call for greater racial sensitivity to end segregation. Now, with all of that, there is a war, the Spanish-American War, that really is a turning point in U.S. foreign policy. Then we follow that later on with World War I. You know the Roaring Twenties. You've probably heard of that phrase. Ending with the stock market crash in 1929. 1930s is a terrible decade for us, the Great Depression. And that will end with World War II. So just by me saying that in 10 seconds, you see there's an awful lot of events that we're going to need to go over at this time period. But this is a defining time. I'm just going to make this reference right now quickly. Hopefully I'll be able to emphasize it greater during the year. I just told you that the Gilded Age is the late 1800s. The Progressive Age, or the Progressive Era, is the early 1900s. Now, some historians are wondering if we should really connect the two and blend them together. That maybe the problems of the Gilded Age don't end with the Progressive Era, and the calls for reforms don't begin in 1890, but actually were beginning earlier. It's an interesting little concept to ponder. All right, and our last two times periods, we have 1945 to 1980. So following World War II, the old way of teaching this, teachers would go 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. They would do decade by decade. The new type of historical literature on this is really that we should try to think of this more in themes because the decades don't do a great job of defining it. So that's why I put the presidents on the right side for you. At some point we will remember them. This guy here, that's Pegasus. He wanted to be right in between LBJ and Nixon, but he didn't make it. But the Vietnam War will be a defining moment for this time period. The Chicago Democratic Convention is what I referred to in the classes earlier last week, in which the protesters nominated Pegasus for the presidency. All right, and then we end with the final time period, 1980 to the present, and that will be the election of Ronald Reagan, which we're going to learn about in a few days. There's also going to be a first Persian Gulf War, and then you probably know the presidents here because this becomes your lifetime: Clinton, Bush, and Barack Obama. And then, of course, I put a little question mark at the end, but I put this book cover here, The World is Flat, because 1980 to the present, I really want you to emphasize the term globalization. That really is the trend of this time period, in which the world economies are so interconnected that what happens in one part of the world really does have an impact throughout. We saw that this summer with the Chinese stock market plummeting and having an impact on our stock market, or at least it seemed to have an impact on our stock market. So globalization, Thomas Friedman wrote this book over a decade ago in which he makes the argument that 10 things have happened in the world that have leveled the playing fields for everybody. And we could try to fight it if we'd like. I mean, I think Donald Trump, some of his thoughts are to fight it, but Thomas Friedman would argue you really aren't going to win that battle. So you're better off embracing and responding, reacting to the problem, to the issues of globalization. So that'll be the final time period. So I hope I've been able to give you a nice, clear explanation of each of the time periods. And when I see you in class, I will now explain to you how we will approach the course and these curriculum. But this is something, it'll be up. You could always look at it and review it at any point. I may just give you a quick quiz to identify what happened during each of these time periods, but this is definitely a good beginning for us. And I think I'm just rambling now. So I will talk to you guys in class, and have a great rest of your day.